Hi, everyone, and welcome to Channel 31 Quest by Community. This is Ricki Spencer. Today, we're going to be talking everything all about voices, especially looking at the idea of comedians in expressing oneself as a trans and gender diverse person on stage. What does that look like? What does that sound like for the audience? And what sort of imagery and messaging are we going to try and send out? As well as looking at the culture of drag kings. And through guiding us through this journey is Chris McAllister, a comedian based out in Sydney, and they are also a producer of many works in creative spaces, and they are also on the board of Trans Pride Australia. Welcome, Chris.
Hi, Ricky. Thanks for having me.
So tell us, Chris, tell us a little bit about your journey. What got you sort of interested in the entertainment industry?
Well, I've always been interested in comedy and always try and crack jokes and stuff with friends. And then there was an opportunity to perform on stage back in 2017, I believe it was. And I wrote a 7-minute stand up comedy piece. And at the time, I was uh, identifying as a lesbian and looking like a lesbian, whatever that looks like. And so yeah, I did it in a lesbian night, and it went really well, and I got hooked.
What was that like the first time you went on stage and you had the whole audience captivated and listening to your words? What sort of feelings and embodiment did you go through at that moment?
I had never felt nerves the way I felt them before going on stage that night. I was backstage, and I was so nervous, and then the host said, "Don't worry, this is like the warmest, most supportive audience that you could do this." It was a load of lesbians, and it's true they were. But when I first came out on stage, I opened my mouth, and there were no words that came out of my mouth. It was just a noise. It was like, but then after I got my groove back, and I carried on.
Did that moment change your life once you did that performance?
It did in I guess it did in a way. I didn't do another performance for 10 months after that. I just didn't get into it. But I did have a video of that performance, which I shared with a person who I started seeing, who then became my wife. So perhaps it did change my life in that way.
And I was reading somewhere that you're very passionate about, working with community, and you set up I think it's called Quiz of Joy. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
2.5, 3 years ago, I started my gender journey. I started actually looking at gender and what it meant to me, and exploring being non binary, and exploring the possibility of going on hormones and having top surgery, which I've done now. And I also wanted to create a show that had this community feel and brought community together and had us connected. And so I created Queers of Joy as a space to do that, and it was going to be and it is a night to celebrate trans and gender diverse people and their voices and their vitality. And so that's how that came about. And so the very first show, I was still using she, her pronouns. I was still going by my birth name. But by the second show, 2 months later, I'd started hormones. And so every show after that was every 2 months, and it seemed to be an update on where I was at with my transition, which was nice to have an audience come along with me. It's better than therapy.
What's it like, Chris, being on stage with other gender and gender non-conforming people?
It's great. It's a space that it really is a joyful space, and it's a very supportive space and uplifting. And it's a place where you get to be with community and celebrate being who we are and the diversity within our community as well. And it's also a space that people have said that they don't just feel included, that they belong. And so it's really soul nourishing. And it wouldn't be great if the world was more like that.
One of the things that's always fascinated me, in our entertainment industry has been we've had the for many years the drag queen movement and different expressions, and we saw that obviously hit the mainstream. 20, 30 years ago we had Priscilla, Queen of the Desert. How did the drag king kind of movement sort of emerge, especially in Sydney, and how did you become involved in that space?
Well, kings have been around for the same amount of time as queens, as you know, a little bit more underground. And so there has been a recent resurgence of drag kings after a bit of a hiatus globally, I believe. I'm not sure exactly why, but the Sydney scene is thriving at the moment. Um, and there's a couple of different nights dedicated to drag kings, and then in at Queers of Joy, well, the way I've met my wife, Danica, was doing a group drag king performance. We had a mutual friend who was a drag king in Sydney, and at the time, and she asked us both and a couple of other people to be backup dancers for this performance that she had in mind, and that's where I met my wife. And then when we started Queers of Joy, I one of my ideas was I said, "Oh, wouldn't it be fun to give that away to someone else? We'll do a group drag king performance. You can."
Mm.
She's a choreographer, so you can choreograph the routine, and they can perform for the first time at the show. And so that's what we did. We got four friends to do it for us on the very first show, and they did a Michael Bublé number, and it was a really popular part of the show. So every single show since then, we've had a brand new group perform for the first time, and they've become known as Kings of Joy. And so Danica has coached and choreographed 78 brand new drag kings in Sydney in 2.5 years. She's actually at rehearsal now with the next group.
Oh, that's incredible. And is there a difference between the way drag queens perform from King Drag?
From what I've seen, there are a lot more different ways to be a drag king than a queen because drag kings are so underground and not mainstream. Drag kings can make their own rules up. There's no one way to be a drag king, and so a lot of it can be really artistic, can be funny, can be um, a commentary, a social commentary, could be sexy. There's so many different ways to be a drag king, and but the thing that what what we what we like to express on stage is non-toxic masculinity, and actually a way of expressing masculinity that can be really good for you and should be part of like your gender expression that you nourish and not be afraid of. So that's where we focus, and also entertainment, obviously.
Speaking of entertainment, do they kings also do things like story time?
Yeah, yeah, I've got a number of friends that do drag story time, and yeah, very versatile. Do hen nights, do all sorts.
I just sort of wanted to mention it because it has been in the public recently, all the toxicity and the hate that we had here in Melbourne with various performances of drag queens doing story time. Do you feel that drag kings would also get that type of publicity as well? And why is there only a focus on drag queens?
I think it's probably a similar reasons why trans femme people get a lot more hatred and discrimination than trans masc people. I don't know if it's something to do with femininity and masculinity, and that perhaps people can understand why a person assigned female at birth would want to present more masculine, but and because being masculine is more desirable in the world and it gets you further. Whereas why would you be assigned male at birth and want to express more femininity? You must be like there must be something wrong with you. That's not what I think. Obviously, that's I don't know. Is it something around that?
The other thing that I'm fascinated is the costume. How do you come up with the ideas for costume?
I do know some kings who go really, really over the top, and they get massive shoulders, massive hair, and emulate more of the drag queen style, so that you just everything is bigger. And then I know people who go really elaborate in their costumes, and so that the costumes link to the song. And then there's people who are more sort of realistic, and it's kind of more male impersonation, so it's less kind of caricature. It's really up to the individual, and just and one thing is that we always say is like express your own individuality and your own experience. Don't try and express someone else. It's something that's already there inside you that you can like maximize and exaggerate.
With your particular persona that you present on the stage, does it sort of morph into different aspects? Like, does that particular character develop over time?
My drag king persona is Chase Cox, and pretty much a bit of a himbo. Uh, Likes to get all of the audience, doesn't matter what gender they are, excited, and is very self-expressed on stage and likes the applause. So that's pretty much that's pretty much Chase Cox. But then I have the person who I am on stage when I'm hosting the show or doing stand-up comedy. That's me, but at my most, I guess, silliest and just wanting to make people laugh and bring people joy. Often, like when I'm not on stage, I can be a bit more reserved and maybe a bit more serious, and don't speak as much, do a lot of listening. And then on stage, that's my time when like I get this energy that comes from, I don't know where, deep inside me, and I feel alive on stage. So that is all me, but it's just me at my most energetic and um, out there with people, trying to make them laugh and entertain them and give them a good night.
I now want us to kind of explore the world of being a comic, and what's it like in, say, 2023 for a trans and non-binary comics to find material that meets the standards for community not being offended.
You always run the risk of offending somebody with comedy, um, because even if you're talking about your own experience, someone might take it personally that that's not their experience, and you know it's just what you run the risk of. Obviously, I would never poke fun at a whole group of people at their expense. So a lot of my material is based off my own experience, and lately I do a lot of stuff that's based off having a 7-year-old daughter who is mostly an ally, and those are real stories. So I hope that people can't get offended at my own stories, and I do think that being trans or going through transition and people's reaction to that, I think there's a lot of humor in that, and I would prefer to see the humor in that. And I think that if I'm telling the joke and I'm telling the story, then there's no problem with finding the humor in aspects of being trans.
Because you're such a public figure when you're out there, where does the other Chris, the private Chris, how do you navigate that? Because we hear so much of your storytelling through your experiences on stage. How do you keep moments about yourself to yourself?
Being on stage is only there's only a couple of hours every couple of months, and then obviously social media is curated and you only see certain parts of that. And I don't really post much about family. My daughter's not too much on social media, and then what I put on social media is often I try and be inspiring and not complain. um, you know I don't. I just want to be. I just want to be an example for people to go. Oh, I can do that. Like I can be trans and thrive, rather than be trans and oh my goodness, I'm sentenced to a life of suffering. Like so, I'd rather represent a thriving trans person. And so that's obviously I have my days where I'm in a bad mood or things don't go well or I'm upset. And that's probably when you won't hear from me as much.
I also know that you do a lot of other work, and you're heavily involved with Trans Pride Australia. For the listeners that may not know, what is Trans Pride Australia?
Transpride Australia is a non-profit organisation that was set up in 2015 by Peter Friend and group of her friends. And at the time, she wanted to create a space that trans people could get together and socialise. And so now it's grown into what we have today, and there's four of us on the board, and a couple of us are sort of activists in the community and doing a lot of work behind the scenes. For me, I'm more into creating spaces for trans people to share stories, to socialize. So um, we recently did some workshops called Trans Talks online that you know about, Ricki, that you facilitated a couple for us, where people got to express themselves through poetry, given the prompt of voice that you did. And people that weren't writers, people that didn't know themselves as poets, people that felt isolated in some way got to be with their community and um, see that once we come together and connect with each other, like that's when the magic happens.
Every time you do a workshop, Chris, what sort of energy do you walk away with?
I always come away with feeling very moved by people and people's humanity, and I can also I can sometimes get disconnected from people, as in I'm not in touch like with people's humanity as much because I do, because of all the producing that I do, and it's kind of like behind the scenes, and yeah, it's a lot of it solo work. So when I'm involved in those workshops, it actually feeds my soul. I get to be in touch with humanity, and I just think that when people are really sharing their authentic stories, that's when I feel alive. When people are actually like digging deep and going, "Oh, this is how it is for me," and and people go, "Oh, that's how it is for me too," and relate with each other and connect, and yeah. So I get very invigorated, and so it's not all selfless what I do. It's selfish because it nourishes me as well, and I get a lot of joy out of it.
In the next few months, Chris, what sort of projects do you have up and coming?
Well, Queers of Joy runs every 2 months, so we've got a show coming up next week, and so we've got that. And then I'm off to the UK for my mum's 70th at the end of July, and I'm actually doing a show in London. I'm going to be on the Guilty Feminist podcast there, so it'll be recorded live in front of an audience, and then it'll be a podcast. And I'm also part of what we do with Queers of Joy is we got connected with a group of refugees in Kenya. They're LGBTQIA refugees. They're known collectively as Block 13. They're all from Uganda. And we've been connected with them now for a year and a half. They got in touch with Queers of Joy on Facebook. And so myself and Danica and a couple of friends, we host fortnightly Zoom calls with a group from there, and it's kind of peer to peer support. And also, we're advocating for them. How can we get them resettled? They face a lot of discrimination in the refugee camp from other refugees, unfortunately, and also the locals there and the Kenyan police. So that's an ongoing project that I'm involved in.
That's so important, Chris, that you've highlighted that, the privileges that we have in this country where we can speak and have a place and space, it's not always afforded in other countries. And what have you heard any stories that you want to share, like what it's like for somebody who is trans or gender diverse in Uganda? What sort of experience that they go through?
They're pretty harrowing experiences. So in Uganda, it's already illegal to be gay, and they've or gender diverse, and they've just recently signed into law a new anti-homosexuality bill in the last week, to make it even worse for gay people. And so the people that we know, They came to Kenya 4 or 5 years ago, being told that this is your pathway to being resettled into a country that you can be yourself and not be persecuted, and then instead they've been holed up in this refugee camp, which is it really squalid conditions in the middle of the desert. When it's dry, the all the sand gets like blown, around. They're in these makeshift shelters. Back in 2020, one of them was burnt down in an arson attack. Someone lost their life.
Mm.
Um, they have things stolen from them regularly. They're attacked. So there's lesbians, transgender people, and gay men all living together. Um, and yeah, there was one woman that's just recently died who was an ally in the camp. Very rare to have an ally, an older woman who they all called Mama. And she was attacked quite often, and so were her children because she was an ally to them. And so they're all banded together. There's 56 adults and children, and they band together because it's safety in numbers, but it's also means that they're visible. But they're activists, they're human rights defenders, and they refuse to be silent. And the
Mm.
UNHCR have told them, be quiet, stop sticking out. Don't dress like that. That's why you're getting attacked. But they say they would rather have a voice than be silent, um, and they'd rather have a voice and risk you know persecution than be silent. So that's what they do, and you know part of my commitment and my wife's Danica's commitment now is to be there for them and offer that listening for them every 2 weeks on Zoom, and yeah, and also just know how privileged we are in this country that we can have a show that we have and do online workshops and all the things that we have here, which just seems so far away for people in Uganda or Kenya.
If people were listening and they were really passionate from and they wanted to supporting our community in Uganda, are there any spaces or how can people get in touch or to help our community in Uganda?
We had a website made for them, which they now use to blog. So you can have a look and check out their stories, freeblock13.com.
We do have so much privilege in this country, and although many of us are in hardship, but we are still have the privilege of having space and a place in homes. And I think if we can all give a little bit, at least access the blogs and give our supports, and give a little bit, then we're making a difference, which is so important. And going to another country, Chris, what's that like? Because this is something, I guess, for people like many people like myself who struggle with, oh my god, how am I going to go as a non-binary person? Have you had any experience or issues with traveling yourself?
Yes, I have not changed my passport yet. So I've still got an F for female on my passport, and I've still got my birth name on there. And I was traveling last year, last April. Went to Fiji, and it probably would have been fine. However, I didn't realize that you weren't allowed to bring sex toys into Fiji. So had a dildo in the suitcase, and so once you get into Fiji, they X-ray your suitcase as you're going in. And so they said, "Is this your bag?" I said, "Yes." So they took me into a room just behind there, and my wife was in there as well, but a different table. And they started searching the bag, and they found the dildo, and then they also found a stand to pee device. So for trans masc people might use this to be able to use urinals. Um,
Oh yes, yeah.
yeah, so that's not a sex toy. That's actually just to use to go to the toilet. So they were trying to take them both away, and I was saying, no, that's not that. This is what that is, and I was saying I'm trans, and they just they were not understanding what I was saying at first, and then they wouldn't believe me, and then they were looking at the passport. My passport had a picture of like 9 years earlier, so my early 20s, and they were like, "This is not you," and I was like, "It is me." the only thing that I could think of that I had with proof of being trans was the letter that I had from my psychologist to say that I could go on hormones. So I kind of dug that out of my emails and I showed it to them. She brought a supervisor over. And this is also that I could save the Santa device because it was a Christmas present from my wife and I know it's a bit expensive. So that was to save that. But they confiscated the dildo, took that, wouldn't let us have that back. And I did not realize that you could not take those into Fiji, but rest assured, I have now done all the research, and there's lots of countries that you can't take sex toys into, including Thailand.
Thank you for that, Chris, for our audience, because I think that's so important, especially for our trans men and non-binary folk. Is one of the takeaways that to have some type of letter from a medical practitioner.
I think I would just probably leave it at home if you can, just so that you don't even have to have that interaction because it's not pleasant. It did impact the whole week there because I wasn't. It made me think. Like I don't know what people's attitudes are, and at the time I hadn't had top surgery, so I was looking like this. So presenting masculine people, you know, thought that I was a man, but I hadn't had top surgery, so I kept covered up the whole time. Even by the pool, I had like a rashy on, because I just was like, I don't know what the reaction's going to be. I think yeah, and that really struck home to me that people like in other countries don't even have visibility yet. You know, we've
Mhm.
got visibility now, and now we want, equality, we want rights, we want, you know, not non-discrimination. And in other countries, they don't even have visibility. That woman at the airport thought there were no trans people in Fiji.
It's a really good sort of experience of sharing our stories of traveling around that we can understand how we really need to be prepared, especially having documentations to validate, authenticate ourselves. As we wrap up, where is Chris going to be in, say, 2 or 3 years' time?
I will have written an hour-long stand-up comedy special. You might have seen me at Melbourne Comedy Festival. um, I will maybe have had another baby.
Oh,
Something would be great to expand our family a bit more. And I don't know. I want to continue creating spaces for queer and trans people to get together and thrive. And I love little projects, and I love what we do with Queers of Joy, and I love everything that we're doing with Trans Pride Australia and all the opportunities that that people can have through that. So with Trans Pride Australia, my idea is to do a trans life drawing class. Would be the next thing. So yeah, I don't know. I'll take the opportunities and keep passing them on as much as I possibly can and see where I end up.
it's been an absolute pleasure having you today on Quest by Community, Chris, and we hope we can have you back when you come back from the UK, just to give us an update about the experiences as travelling overseas as a trans man and what it's like going through navigating those sort of systems. Because I think for a lot of us, we would love to know what it's like going through security, and also your experiences, like talking to local communities in the UK, what it's like. Are we behind? Is it more complex?
I just say I do know, the reason that like countries like Fiji have those kind of laws and stuff, and Uganda and Kenya, and it is because of colonialism. I'm very well aware of that. I just wanted to put that in there. And also, if you are traveling, there's so many Facebook groups. Sorry to mention that name of, but go on with the groups, the trans groups, and the people. People are always going, "I'm traveling to this country. What's it going to be like there?" And someone will have had an experience that they can share. If you are feeling a bit apprehensive about traveling, if I had not have had a dildo in my bag, I probably would have been fine because I've traveled through Doha and stuff like that. No, I don't think they actually are focusing on the F or the M on your passport. They're just looking at the picture to make sure that it's the same person on your passport. They're not really looking at the gender because I've done a lot of traveling through places and there was no problem.
And on that note, want to thank Chris so much for spending some time with us on Quest by Community. It's been an absolute pleasure to hearing about all about drag kings, looking about what's it like to be a gender non-conforming comedian, and the work of Trans Pride Australia.
Thank you, Ricky. Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.